B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comments. It's Friday, September 29th, 2017. And as usual on Friday, we're recording our regular daily podcast and letting people watch the Bald Talking Head on Facebook Live. I see we got Billy Cook, Robert Leeds, Tom Walsh. They're the early adopters of the Peter B. Collins video feed today. Gentlemen, I ask you to hit the share button and spread it far and wide. And Billy, I saw one of your exchanges on Facebook today, so if you have an opportunity to call in, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. As you know, we take live phone calls here on the live Facebook feed, and my phone number for you to call in and comment is 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. And I welcome your calls on any topic that we discuss here or anything else that you think is important and worthy of public discussion. I take on all topics, all viewpoints, and I particularly invite people to call if you don't agree with me. Maybe you were offended by my interview with Phil Giraldi this week. Maybe you think that I'm a crazy lunatic for remaining skeptical about the Trump-Russiagate narrative. Well, I welcome your comments, and particularly those who don't agree with me. So grab a line, and we will talk over the course of the next half hour or 45 minutes. My lead story today is about the effort to crack down on so-called fake news in social media and in search. And the two giants, Facebook and Google, responding to the blistering criticism that they've received, have imposed new algorithms that are having a devastating impact on independent and progressive news sites on the web. And I'm reading here an editorial, a pretty strong statement from Don Hazen. He is the editor at Alternet. They are a reliable, progressive, kind of mainstream liberal outlet. No wacky conspiracy theories. It's a far cry from Alex Jones, if that is any kind of a benchmark for you. Well, because Google announced changes to the algorithm to combat fake news, it appears that Alternet has suffered a huge decline in traffic, 40%. Now, they used to get almost 3 million unique visitors a month, and that has declined, a loss of an average of 1.2 million people every month who are no longer reading Alternet stories. Alternet features Max Blumenthal, who is an incredible reporter. Ben Norton recently wrote some very strong media criticism pieces, and I support Alternet. I read it on a infrequent basis, but I have a lot of respect for what they do. So the other point here that Hazen makes is that Alternet ranks at the top in terms of its audience loss because Alternet has a deep archive from 20 years of news coverage, and that a lot of people visit the site looking for that archived information. So this also affects, of course, the income of Alternet, because if traffic is down, you're not reaching as many people, and you can't ask them to donate or serve them up ads. And this does have a very serious impact on the business side of a progressive independent media outlet like Alternet. And this is kind of being, the baby being thrown out with the bathwater here. And as we chew over the idea of fake news, I want to reference the latest incredible piece by Robert Perry. Bob Perry is a guy I've known for many years. He's been the leading skeptic from his website, consortiumnews.com. And Consortium News has lost traffic to its website for the same reasons. And so today at Consortium News, Bob Perry takes on the New York Times and the Washington Post for their most recent exaggerated reporting about now the use of Twitter accounts in the election last year linked to Russia. Now, Russia is a huge country, 5 or 6 time zones, 150 million people. And we now see that Russia, just in general as a nation, gets blamed for many things that are kind of vague, fuzzy, non-specific. So Perry takes on Thursday's front page story in the Times that reported, quote, a network of Twitter accounts suspected of links to Russia seized on both sides of the NFL players kneeling during the national anthem issue, with hashtags such as boycott NFL, stand for our anthem, and take a knee. Now, I don't know what Russia would hope to gain from getting involved in the shitstorm, this divisive, it's not even a debate, it's just a shout-down that was started a week ago by President Trump with his Twitter fingers. He is our dear tweeter. And this has been a huge distraction. Maybe it helped people avoid knowing that the effort to scuttle Obamacare fell apart again, and that Trump's reckless efforts to tweak Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, have earned him the disdain of the world community. At any rate, we know that this has been a raging controversy. And to imagine that Russia feels a need to get involved to amplify the tensions between the pro-kneelers and the anti-kneelers is just bizarre. And people appear to just take it in stride and say, oh, yeah, it's got to be true, and it's part of this overarching Russian effort to destabilize the American government. Well, Perry exposes that the study, the report that the New York Times based this on, came from a neocon group called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. But it's not described as neocon by the Times. It's a bipartisan initiative of the German Marshall Fund. And Perry really unpacks the whole story and shows that the New York Times is using very sloppy reporting. They are not checking on the methodology used by the Alliance for Securing Democracy to either identify the Russian sources of these alleged tweets or the details on how the various tweets are identified as being fake news or divisive. Those standards are completely arbitrary, and the Times just blows past that. Perry notes that the neocon folks who populate the Alliance for Securing Democracy include Mike Chertoff, the former Homeland Security Director who profits from those airport body scanners, Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, former Freedom House President David Kramer, and other anti-Russia hardliners like former CIA Deputy Director Mike Morrell and former House Intelligence Committee Chair Mike Rogers. As Perry notes, this group clearly has an axe to grind, a record of deception, and plenty of patrons in the military-industrial complex who stand to profit from whatever falls out from this controversy that has been stoked for over a year now. And he goes on to say that there's $160 million at least in funding for nonprofits and groups like this neocon entity under a bill that Obama signed last December, $160 million in the Combating Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act. Perry also takes on the Washington Post, which took the same basic story about, Russian commentary or tweets related to the NFL controversy. But the difference is at the Post, they linked it to a U.S. Senator whose name is James Lankford. He's a Republican from Oklahoma. And the evidence cited by Lankford's office was a single Twitter account calling itself Boston Antifa that gives its geolocation as Vladivostok, Russia. Now, Perry ran this down, and a reporter for MassLive.com has exposed that the people behind Boston Antifa are a pair of anti-leftist pranksters from Oregon who started Boston Antifa as a parody of actual anti-fascist groups. Now, this is the kind of sloppy reporting. It is not journalism. This is fake news. And you know that the Washington Post and the New York Times are not being blocked by Google or by Facebook. If anything, because they have managed to filter out links to Alternet, to Consortium News, to TruthDig, Truth Out. Well, the traffic available for these mainstream outlets is therefore even bigger. I invite your comments on this or any of the other topics that we're discussing here today on the Peter B. Collins podcast. I've got lines open for your call right now at 415-455-0102, 415-455-0102. Now, Twitter is in the hot seat. A couple of their people were in Washington yesterday to speak to investigators from the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat there, came out and blasted them. He said that the Twitter presentation showed an enormous lack of understanding from the Twitter team of how serious this issue is, the threat it poses to democratic institutions, and their response was frankly inadequate on every level. Now, this may be true. I don't know the extent to which Twitter has the data that investigators wanted to provide that could buttress contentions that Russian interests, including a specific Russian media company, were buying ads on Facebook, placing paid posts on Twitter in an effort to divide Americans. And one of the things I find humorous is this whole exploration of, wow, how did the Russians know what to post in order to divide Americans? Well, they didn't need guidance from the Trump campaign or really anybody in the United States, because all they had to do was make friends with a handful of people in the U.S. on Facebook or become Twitter connected to similar people, and then all they have to do is read their posts. And it's very easy to copy them or to mimic them or to just, share them with people. That's the most common thing that people do in social media. So there's a lot of speculation about all this, and I believe in the end that it's going to be a balloon that flattens rather quickly. Now, here's something, pardon me, I'm just getting over a sinus infection. It's been a nasty one, and I've got a little stuff in my chest here. This is one I could not find in the mainstream media today. I first heard it quoted by Rush Limbaugh on his radio show, and when I looked it up online, there were two sources for it: Alex Jones and PJ Media. PJ Media is a pro-Trump right-wing site. And what they're reporting is that Julian Assange has offered to provide evidence that the Russian collusion narrative is false in exchange for a pardon or a grant of some sort of immunity from President Trump and the United States. Now, last Saturday, Trump told reporters that he's never heard of Assange's offer to make a deal. But we know it was relayed to the White House by California Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher 2 weeks ago. He has told media outlets that Trump is being blocked from knowing about the potential deal with Assange. I think the president's answer indicates there's a wall around him that is being created by people who do not want to expose this fraud, that there was collusion between our intelligence community and the leaders of the Democratic Party. Now, he shared his information and the offer from Assange with the new White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, who reportedly told Rohrabacher to take the information to the intelligence community. Now, if the intelligence community is the source of this manufactured story, how can we expect that they would be a reliable party to investigate this? And one of the things I keep railing about is that we have not exhausted the domestic suspects for the manipulation of the election last year. And Ari Berman, writing, he's usually at The Nation, but this is published at Mother Jones a couple of days ago, he did an investigation of the people who didn't get to vote in Wisconsin, one of the 3 states that delivered the electoral college margin to Donald Trump. And they report on individuals who tried to vote but were either banned from voting because they didn't have the proper documents, or they voted on a provisional ballot that was never counted. And the summary is that more than 1 out of 10 non-voters, about 11.2%, said that they lacked acceptable voter ID and said the law was the reason why they didn't vote. And 6.4% of them said the voter ID law was the main reason that they didn't vote. So the lead author, a political scientist from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Kenneth Mayer, says that roughly 9 to 23,000 likely Democratic voters were prevented from voting in the state of Wisconsin last November. Now back to Facebook for a moment, and hi, Zuck, I know you've got 96 million followers, and I don't. The Department of Justice is playing real hardball with a couple of hundred people who were arrested during protests on Inauguration Day this past January. And we know they're seeking felony charges against many of these people, and it's really hard to justify the kind of draconian effort that they're making to prosecute and convict these people. And now we know, because the issue has been ungagged, but since February, Facebook has been fighting a warrant from the government to cough up the information on thousands of Facebook users. And they want quite a bit of information. They want to know what devices account holders use to access the website of the protest group. And we talked earlier about how the same company that hosts my podcast, a Southern California firm called DreamHost, has been fighting the government's demand for information on the website it hosted that put up information for people who wanted to protest the inauguration. The demand from Facebook continues. They want password, security, question information, credit card information, home addresses, users who were blocked, direct messages, chats, video calls, live streams, Facebook Messenger communications, all Facebook search records, friends lists, ID numbers. I mean, this is massive. And this would mean the government would know the identities of about 6,000 Facebook users who had liked the Disrupt January 20th page prior to February 9th. Now, the Fourth Amendment says there has to be probable cause and a warrant, a court order, for the government to search your private property. And I consider social media to be my private property. And the Fourth Amendment appears to be optional to so many of these investigations and prosecutions these days. Meanwhile, the government has announced that effective on October 18th, anyone who enters the country who is a non-citizen, this includes green card holders, naturalized citizens, and those who have legal residence in the United States beyond a green card, all of them will have to cough up their social media information when they enter the country at an airport or other port controlled by the immigration folks. And this is really sweeping. They will collect social media handles, aliases, associated identifiable information. They'll search results. It said the data would come from publicly available information obtained from the Internet, public records, public institutions, interviews, commercial data, and other sources. My old buddy Faz Shakir, who's now the National Political Director for the ACLU, says this would undoubtedly have a chilling effect on the free speech that's expressed every day on social media. This collect-it-all approach is ineffective to protect national security and is one more example of the Trump administration's anti-immigrant agenda. And we're told that once the government collects this information, they get to keep it forever. So they start to build a file on you the first time you come through a checkpoint, and then it just builds and builds from there. I'd like to hear from you. My lines are open to talk about the issues in the news today. 415-455-0102 puts you through right here to the Peter B. Collins Secret Studio. Again, 415-455-0102. And every day I like to pause for a minute and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Esther Wanning, who just took out a new annual subscription, as did Chris Bartle. Thank you, Chris and Esther. I really appreciate your support. Paul Tomaselli, Cynthia Von Hendricks, Natalie Reel, they're all monthly subscribers who kick in $5 a month. Can you do it too? I don't want your rent money, and if you're on a limited budget, feel free to watch or listen, and you don't have to send me a dime. But if you're solvent and you want to validate the work that I do, I would be happy to accept your support. So come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber, and it takes you to the sign-up page where we dangle bonus books for those who take out a new annual subscription and give us a mailing address here in the continental U.S. The Trump administration is lobbying hard to renew the FISA law, including the problematic Section 702 that authorizes the collection of all kinds of information on you and me. The telephone metadata is now 2 extra clicks away from the government, but the PRISM program continues, allowing the government to collect messaging data sent to and from foreign targets. They monitor Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. The other is a program called Upstream. It scans Internet backbone sites in the U.S. and copies communications to and from foreign targets. And it's that Upstream program that Bill Binney and others have said is the reason why the NSA would know if the Democratic National Committee servers had been hacked by Russians or by anybody else, and that they transferred that information to WikiLeaks. So this is a very problematic law. Barack Obama promised to vote against it while he was a candidate in 2008, and once he secured the nomination, he flip-flopped on that, and he enforced the FISA law, or allowed it to operate freely while he was President of the United States. We've recently featured 2 interviews about the problems at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, the sexual assault scandal, and the cover-up of information relating to sexual assault at the Air Force Academy continues as a serious issue. And now there is a new scandal because in the past few days, some what I would call junior cadets. These are young people, I guess, high school age, who attend the Air Force Academy Prep School, and it includes many African Americans. Well, 5 of them got a racial slur, which has not been published, but the words "go home," and you can imagine it was the N-word, were posted on message boards that are used by these African American students. And this is just another scandal that, while we see that the new Air Force Academy superintendent, Lieutenant General Jay Silveria, who is a graduate of the Academy and the member of an Air Force family, he came out with a strong statement. If you can't treat someone from another gender with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. If you demean someone in any way, you need to get out. If you can't treat someone from another race or different color skin with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. And in this story I'm referring to from the New York Times, they published the massaged information that our source explained she was forced to water down. The Times reports there were 32 reports of sexual assault at the school in 2015-2016. And our source, the whistleblower, told us that there were 49, or maybe more. But she was told to trim that report, and you see that the false information lives on in the mainstream media. Well, now that they've got Neil Gorsuch, a known opponent of organized labor, on the United States Supreme Court, the justices have quietly added a case to the docket of the fall term. And it's one of 11 new cases. This one is another case brought by a union employee who doesn't want to really be a member of a union or pay dues for collective bargaining. And a few years back, in 1977, in a decision called Abood versus Detroit, and I happen to know some people who are related to this teacher named Abood who brought the case. There was a ruling that said, well, you can declare yourself financial core as a union member, and you're only obligated to cover the costs of collective bargaining. You don't have to pay the additional money that the union spends on political advocacy, for example. That is the state of the law today, but it's likely the Supreme Court will basically say that anybody who is covered by a union contract can elect not to pay dues. And this could be a huge, huge obstacle for organized labor. This is not surprising, but a new analysis of the Bush, I'm sorry, I got the wrong idiot, the Trump tax reform, that's what they call it, it's not really reform, but the tax package announced by the president this week and being shaped by the Republicans would really hammer middle-income people. It would deliver the major benefit to the top 1%. Does that surprise you? Of course not. But it would give far more modest tax cuts to most other households, an average cut of about $1,700 for most households, but 1 in 4 of those households will end up paying more in taxes. And here's the bottom line for you. 80% of the tax benefits would accrue to those in the top 1%. Households making more than $900,000 a year would see their taxes drop by more than $200,000. And as I mentioned the other day, you should watch what the Democrats do, because you've noticed they're not opposed to tax reductions. They're not opposed to repatriating the profits of companies like Apple that are technically stashed overseas. That would be rewarding tax cheats. And so I am very vigilant about how the Democratic leadership responds to the Republican call to reduce taxes, when, in fact, there's no real need to reduce taxes. Oh, sure, everybody loves a tax break. Nobody likes to pay taxes. I'm right there with you. But because of the unlimited spending at the Defense Department, and because we do have a chronic national deficit and a huge long-term national debt, I don't see the basis for these tax cuts. But you don't hear any Democrats speaking up and saying, oh yeah, we don't need tax cuts. They're arguing about what kinds of tax cuts and who benefits. Yesterday, I released a very controversial interview with Philip Giraldi. He's a former CIA officer, and he has been working as a columnist for the American Conservative for the last 15 years. Last week, after he published a column, not at the American Conservative, but at a website called the UNS Review, he was fired by the American Conservative. And the clip you're about to hear from my interview with Phil Giraldi summarizes pretty much what he said in his article. And that is that the advocates for a war against Iran and for abrogating the six-party nuclear deal are mostly Jewish Americans.
The reason that no one takes on the Israel lobby, or I think essentially the issue here is we all talk about the Israel lobby, but that's a euphemism. The Israel lobby is a Jewish lobby. The money, the power, the political access, everything that drives it comes from Jewish resources. And it's a Jewish lobby that is doing things in defense of and assistance to the self-designated Jewish state. And somehow this whole discussion is off the table. And as I said to the gentleman, I said, this is the electrified third rail of American politics. You do not mention Jews in the same context as wars, and that's completely out of the discussion, even if every single person you're identifying as part of the war party is a friend of Israel and is Jewish.
Now, Phil Giraldi has taken a lot of heat. Valerie Plame, who tweeted a link to this article, has been bashed in the media and subject to a browbeating op-ed from Alan Dershowitz. But when you look at who was opposed to President Obama's deal with Iran, when you look at who advocates a war with Iran, I think Phil Giraldi has told the truth. And in my interview with him, I acknowledge my own self-censorship. that I often do not tell the full truth about the influence of the State of Israel, of AIPAC, of the Zionist lobby in this country, because of the ferocious blowback that they serve up. And Phil Giraldi has, I think, set a new example for honesty in American political coverage. I've got a caller on the line here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. Good afternoon. Who's this?
Hey, Peter. It's Ian Berman.
Oh, hi, Ian. Thanks for your call. And I'll mention that Ian sent me a draft of a piece that he's written, partly critical of Phil Giraldi for the article that I was just talking about. So, Ian, go ahead and share your views with our listeners.
I'd be pleased to, and thanks for the time. I think Phil has really written a very important article, but he narrowed his focus to just Jewish individuals, people who are supporting IPAC, who are in the government, who are in the media, who have a very visible stance in the political environment. But by doing so, I think he also opened himself up to criticism because he made it appear as if he's saying, really, it's only the Jews who are driving the American foreign policy in the Middle East. And just to be safe, after I heard the interview, I went back and read it again, and I was really confirmed that that's what I thought. If you take a look at this in a couple of ways, one, a very interesting conversation I heard from Noam Chomsky amongst the hundreds I've heard. He talks about how America's support for Israel is really in its own interest. And you have to look at that from a perspective of empire, not in terms of morality or what is the right thing to do, but as the U.S. tries to maintain its position as the only hegemony in the world, it wants to support the countries that support it. And clearly, since '67, Israel has been one of those countries.
Mm-hmm.
So as Chomsky noted, it's not like the Palestinians have any rights because the Palestinians really don't provide anything to the U.S. In that sense, they have negative rights because they're opposed to their local Don, who is the Israelis. The next thing that I noticed is that...
Well, let me pause you there, and you can make your other point in a second. The one thing that I would say is at least the intention and the origin of Giraldi's piece was focused not on the overall long-term struggle or the U.S. relationship with Israel long-term, but was more narrowly focused on the advocacy for military assaults on Iran, for the abrogation of the Six-Nation Agreement on nuclear issues with Iran. And I think in that respect he is correct. And he did name names specifically related to the push for war with Iran. So I take your point. And I do think that, Giraldi made a very strong, blunt attack in his article. And in our interview, he did walk back, and maybe you've had a chance to listen, Ian, but he walked back one of his prescriptions, which was to require that when Bill Kristol is interviewed on TV, that under his name it says that he's Jewish and a strong advocate for war with Iran. He did regret that, and he walked it back in our interview. But, for example, he suggests that individuals who are not neutral about Israel shouldn't be involved in the peace process. And front and center is the guy I call the Crown Prince, Jared Kushner, who, is hardly a neutral arbiter. He has no capacity to be a mediator between Israel and the Palestinians because he has been, even before we've ever heard of Jared Kushner, he was actively involved in fundraising and providing political support for illegal settlements in the West Bank. So that's the context of Giraldi's piece, and I think you've expanded it a little bit for the purposes of your critique.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I don't disagree with those points. What I'm suggesting is that he's looking at it from the perspective of, I'm only going to name the Jews who have an interest in this, and then say, and literally his title is, as I scroll up, America's Jews are driving America's wars. Mm-hmm. Now, he's talking about wars, so he's talking about multiple conflicts. So I take that as referring not only to trying to start a war with Iran, but also what's happened in the recent past.
All right.
So I have no objection to what you just said in terms of all the Jews that he mentioned and their push for war with Iran. I don't disagree with any of that. I disagree with the assertion that it appears to be an exclusive push.
Yes, and I'm there with you on that. What I think is important, though, is that, and I also said this to Giraldi in the interview, that, we've been told that political correctness is passé, and that we don't have to censor ourselves, and we've got this tweeting monster Trump who proves it almost every day. Yet, still, issues related to criticism of the State of Israel, of Zionism, of the effort to subjugate U.S. foreign policy to the interests of Israel, and the extent to which that is stoked by American Jews, I think it's a remarkable piece that he wrote, and it stands out for its willingness to confront the truth about this.
No doubt. I agree. And if he had titled it "The 600-Pound Gorilla in the Room" and talked about it as one of the driving forces,
mm-hmm.
then I think it would be a very different aspect of this. I mean, just to take a point in hand so people understand my context, when it comes to the Iraq War, your two prime drivers were Cheney and Rumsfeld. Now, those guys are not Jewish, and I don't think they really could care less about Israel except to the extent that they help the American empire. And since Israel does help, then they actively would accept working with Israel and allowing Israel to pursue its own interests. If you go forward into the Obama administration, if you look at Libya was driven by Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a look at Syria, it's kind of hard to pinpoint who's the person most responsible for that. So I look at the commander-in-chief, who's Barack Obama. It's more than just this Israel lobby push, which is why I think he caught so much flack for this article. His article reads as if it's really only the Jews who are pushing this, and it's not. They have a very big stake in it for whatever reasons, primarily a nationalistic form of their religious identity. But I think there's much more to this. You have to look at all the military contractors which are salivating over a war with Iran,
mm-hmm.
who enjoyed record profits over Syria and Yemen. This isn't. My whole point is that he really made a major mistake by making it seem that it was the Jews who were driving this. If you listen to what Norm Finkelstein has said about this, he's like, Cheney and Rumsfeld have spent their whole careers in foreign policy, basically. They're two serious people. They work really hard, sun up to sundown, and they got to their position of power. If you think that the Jews that were working under them somehow pulled one over on them, that these are two gullible men, you're kind of missing the point.
No, but see, I understand that, you're completely accurate here, Ian, all right? Dick Cheney is not Jewish. But he was very comfortable exploiting and manipulating the political support for Israel and using it to advance some of his goals, which were quite parallel to those of the Netanyahu government and the Ehud Barak government before it. And so I think that, I do take your point, and that Giraldi, may be guilty of a little too sweeping of statements in his article. But I do think that fundamentally, as a nation, that we need to become more comfortable in saying, well, it's not just the Israel lobby, this faceless, entity. It is a series of individuals. And, his article named a lot of names, but didn't include Shmuley Boteish, the self-styled rabbi who, is eager for war at any moment. Didn't include Sheldon Adelson, who is funding a lot of this anti-Iranian sentiment. And so, yeah, I do understand that we could rewrite Giraldi's piece. But to me, the most important part was that he was courageous enough to call it the way he sees it, and that is a true rarity in today's media environment.
Absolutely.
All right, Ian. Well, I thank you for the call. Thanks for airing that out with me. Always good to hear from you.
Always a pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
All right, take care. And if you'd like to call and comment, pro or con, I'll be here for a few more minutes live on Facebook, and I'd love to hear from you at 415-455-0102. And yes, it's true, Tom Price, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, did submit his resignation to the Trump administration today. He got dinged for his profligate use of charter jets, not only for domestic travel but also overseas. And while he said he was going to pay back the cost of his own seat on these flights, that kind of overlooked that the flights wouldn't have happened if he hadn't ordered them to take him. So the idea that just paying for one seat would settle up with the U.S. taxpayers, well, that's bullshit, and we can say that. A new poll out of Alabama shows that Bible thumper Roy Moore has only a 6-point lead over his Democratic opponent, Doug Jones. And I know that some people will get excited about this and encouraged, but we've got to dampen your enthusiasm. This is Alabama, where Don Siegelman had his election for governor stolen. He went to sleep the winner and woke up the loser, and you cannot expect a level playing field or honest elections in Alabama. The other thing that is really unknown for me is what I would call the Trump effect, because last year the Republicans spent millions of dollars with negative ads about Trump. The Clinton campaign ran quite a few themselves, and the media piled on with a lot of negative coverage of Donald Trump. But the more negative you go on these people, the more it locks in the support of their loyal and feeble-minded followers. And so we really don't know what Roy Moore's candidacy will bring, but it is frightening that a man who has defied the Constitution over his desire to have the statue of the Ten Commandments in the courthouse in Alabama, he was bounced from the court for that, he got reelected, and then last year he led the rear guard charge to block the implementation of the Supreme Court ruling on marriage equality, instructing, county registrars not to issue marriage licenses. And that clear defiance of the rule of law, of the supremacy of the Supreme Court, from a guy who was the Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court, is stunning. But because it plays well to the red meat, red voters in Alabama, it's anybody's guess how it will turn out. Well, the leader of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has defied the odds. The U.S. has reported killing him several times. Russia claims they killed him in Raqqa a couple of months ago. But he issued a new audio recording yesterday. So apparently he is still alive, and he is pleading with his loyal followers to keep up the fight, even as they're being pushed out of both Syria and the strongholds that they had held in Iraq. Now, in Kurdistan, where the Kurdish fighters were the ones who ejected the Islamic State after the Iraqi army failed to do so. In fact, the Iraqis, that army just melted away, despite the billions of dollars we spent to train and equip them. Well, on the heels of the referendum, where some 90+% of the population voted for independence, both Baghdad and the capital of Turkey, Ankara, are cracking down. The airport is being closed, flights have been canceled, roads are being closed at the border by the Iraqis, and the leadership of the Kurds is saying, well, we're hoping that this is temporary. But if they're actually pushed, the one thing that you can't expect is that Iraq will take military action, because the Kurds showed them that they've got much more fight than the Iraqi army has, or at least has been able to muster so far. So Turkey is cutting off its purchase of oil from the Kurdish region of northern Iraq, and of course only the state of Israel supports independence for the Kurds, and it's not because they support independence for the Kurds. The next independence vote comes on Sunday in Barcelona, the region called Catalonia. And that, of course, is bitterly opposed by the Spanish central government in Madrid. They are trying to prevent polling places from opening. They are trying to threaten individuals with police or army intervention. But I think the vote will go on. And it's truly shameful that the U.S. and other nations don't support the aspirations of independence that are held by many people around the world, most significantly the Kurds and the Catalonia population today. I want to recommend the latest article from Kevin Gostola at Shadowproof. He got a hold of the interview transcript of the FBI agents who arrested Reality Winner. She was the NSA contractor working in Georgia. She sent a document to The Intercept, and even before The Intercept could publish it, they were able to track her down. They showed up at her house, two agents, both playing the good cop role, and they got her to talk. Based on Gostola's reporting, there's no indication that they read her Miranda rights, so it's not clear if what amounts to a confession will be admissible at trial. But the government is unwilling to let Reality Winner out on bail as she faces trial. And the interview from the agents showed that, she, I don't know, she seems to be a pretty unlikely whistleblower. She said she was concerned that the FBI agents might see her like Edward Snowden, and she says, I wasn't trying to be a Snowden or anything. And at one point, she installed a flash drive into a computer at her workplace, and that was information that the agents knew about. And she says she didn't do anything other than plug it in. She wanted to see what would happen if she did. So she doesn't seem to be a very serious spy or a provocateur. She doesn't seem to be managed by any other party. And yet she is being treated under the full force of the Espionage Act and could face decades in federal prison. Interesting today, the New York Times and the Guardian from London both published stories about sea creatures and flotsam that were basically a victim of the 9.0 earthquake in Fukushima back in 2011. And it's interesting, it's kind of cute, in fact, that crustaceans, sea slugs, and sea worms have made an almost 5,000-mile journey across the Pacific, showing up on the shores of California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And they tell cute stories about, a Japanese boat that reached Oregon with 20 fish native to the western Pacific trapped inside. They're now held at an aquarium in Oregon. And in April 2012, a couple in Alaska found a football belonging to a Japanese teenager who had lost his home in Fukushima. And a month later, a Harley-Davidson washed up on a Canadian beach 4,000 miles from where it got picked up. But these cute little articles don't even raise the question of what about the radiation that continues to leak from the damaged reactors, from the meltdown cores. It's just, nobody discusses it. We don't need to know because I guess we're so super safe that it just doesn't matter. And finally today, it could be as soon as Sunday, I haven't actually checked, but Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm is about to launch another season of its cringe-inducing comedy. And I must admit that I'm drawn to Curb Your Enthusiasm. Larry David has developed this quirky character who does all the things we're not supposed to do. But I do wonder, since the arrival of Trump, if Larry David still packs a punch when it comes to making Americans cringe. At any rate, we now learn that back in season 4, you may remember an episode called The Carpool Lane, where Larry hires a prostitute and he goes to a game at Dodger Stadium. Well, the night that HBO filmed at Dodger Stadium became very important to a man named Juan Catalan. He was 24 years old at the time. He was arrested by police and accused of a murder. And he held up his ticket from the Dodgers game. He said, no, I was at Chavez Ravine watching the Braves clobber the Dodgers that night. And his lawyers went to the stadium footage, the Dodger Cam, Dodger Vision, the live TV broadcast of the game. They scoured the footage looking for any indication that Juan Catalan could prove that he was actually in Dodger Stadium that night. And then they took a look at Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it turns out that Catalan was standing or seated in the row right in front of Larry David. And as a result, the charges against Catalan were dismissed. He's a big fan of Curb Your Enthusiasm, you can guess. Thanks for joining, and to our Facebook fans for watching online. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.